Hi, my name is Saida Jaheen and I'm a master's student from King's College London. Thanks for joining this podcast where I will be talking about my article which delves into the struggles faced by local citizens in a post-conflict Nepal in 2006 after the end of the Maoist Insurgency, also known as the People's War. But first, I wanted to talk about my interest in global conflict and why I chose this topic. I studied international relations for my undergraduate and I'm currently studying peace, security and international law for my master's at King's. Hence, global politics has always been a keen interest for me. Exploring conflict zones academically for the last few years has shown me that the end of conflict is not necessarily the start of peace. However, I do think that sometimes the narrative can get twisted into that, taking the complexities of conflict out of the equation and almost treating it like a black and white situation, when in reality, I think a population can face internal struggles way after the formal end of war. This transition period where conflict has ended but peace is not restored has always fascinated me. Peace is almost treated like a default to war. The main focus in the news and in conversations is more on the diplomatic side of things, on whether the government has changed or the policies and laws have changed. The role of citizens and their efforts for reconciliation can often get overlooked or almost become secondary topics. Therefore, I was really drawn to this internship and the question it posed: what happens after the end of war? I really like the element of focusing on citizens and their efforts at reconciliation with the additional consideration of their human needs. Again, I think that's something that gets really overlooked when we're talking about people in post-conflict zones, and it was really a fascinating angle for me to explore. I was also drawn to this internship for the opportunity it gave me to develop on so many skills, such as research and writing as expected, but also making an infographic and doing a podcast like I am right now. Learning to create these new forms of media has been a really fun challenge, and at the start of this internship, I completed a journalism course on storytelling and how to deliver a story effectively. It highlighted the importance of characterization of the people you talk about and how presenting these stories in a humane way is essential to get your readers to engage. If you don't tell a story from a human perspective, it makes your story less interesting for the human readers who are interacting with it. At the start, I found it a little challenging to apply this because I'm not really focusing on a single character in my article, but instead on communities. But it taught me to reconsider this approach from a different perspective, and so I tried to humanize them based on certain identity factors, such as them being ex-fighters for the insurgency. Secondly, I also wanted to address why I chose to write about Nepal and the Maoist insurgency. This year, Nepal made history once again with the recent Gen Z revolution overthrowing the government. Like everyone else, this historic moment was all over my social media, and I got to witness this moment in real time. What really stuck out to me was the solidarity of the people. There was this shared frustration that manifested into shared unity, showing how two things and two contrasting emotions can go hand in hand. I researched more about Nepal and its politics. I wanted to learn about what led up to this moment and why. As a result, I ended up learning so much more about Nepal's history and struggle for a democratic state. Although I knew about the Nepalese civil war, I was never fully aware of all the factors that went into it. South Asian history, I think, often gets underrepresented, and as a South Asian person myself, when I was choosing a topic, I knew that this was an area that I wanted to shed light on. As mentioned at the start, my article delves into peace building and reconciliation efforts from local citizens after the end of war. Hence, before I talk about the content of my article, it's important for me to provide key context as to why the war took place. This context helps us understand not only how the conflict unfolded, but also why local peace-building efforts became so essential in the years that followed. So to start, from 1996 to 2006, Nepal went through a decade-long internal conflict, also known as the Nepalese Civil War or the Maoist Insurgency. It was primarily between the Communist Party of Nepal, which was known as the Maoist, and the Nepalese state, including the Royal Nepal Army and the government authorities. There was a lot of social and political reasons that went into this, resulting to citizens feeling like the monarchy and the government was being oppressive and a group of elites harbouring all their power. Nepal, throughout much of its history, was a monarchy, with the country facing a lot of deep and social inequalities. Although it introduced a multi-party democracy after protests in 1990, the changes did little to improve the conditions for many citizens in their lives. It remained one of the poorest countries in Asia, and there was this lack of adequate education, healthcare, and job opportunities, and claims to land in rural areas. It was really clear that a small elite group was controlling all the wealth and political power, and ethnic groups, lower caste, and women were suffering from systematic marginalization. The Maoist insurgency, as the name would suggest, was inspired by Maoist ideologies and Marx ideologies about revolution. They felt that peaceful political tactics were failing to bring about any meaningful form of change, and that the state continued to be dominated by the monarchy and ruling elites. So, on February 1996, the Maoists launched a people's war, beginning with attacks on police posts and government offices. The goals included abolishing the monarchy, redistributing land and wealth, and ending the caste discrimination, and establishing a much more democratic state. By the end of the conflict, or by the time it had reached its peak, the Maoists had already took control over large parts of the countryside. They established their own parallel system of local government. They collected taxes and conducted community courts. They attracted support by addressing local struggles and promised change. Meanwhile, the government was responding with increasing force, taking further military action and intensifying the conflict. A major turning point came in 2001 when the massacre of the Nepalese royal family put a new king on the throne. In 2005, this new king dissolved the parliament and began to rule directly, which deeply enraged the public. The result was an unlikely alliance of the Maoists with major political parties against the king. Thousands of citizens also joined and wanted to demonstrate how they were willing to fight for democracy and peace. This brought the formal end of the war in 2006 when the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was signed. It paved the way for a new Communist Party of Nepal, and in 2008 the former insurgents became the new elected government and ended the monarchy. The war undoubtedly opened the path towards this new government system and attempted to bring about social reform. However, the war also left lasting social, political, and emotional impact on Nepalese citizens. My article delves into how long-term conflict impacted the people of Nepal, and more importantly, how they overcame these challenges. Starting with the fragmentation of trust and the toll the war took on their social relationships. After being amidst chaos for a decade, it was really hard for communities to learn to coexist in peace again. Minor disputes like casual neighborhood disagreements threatened to escalate into violence. Ex-combatants struggled to come back to a society that didn't trust them, firstly, and secondly, also valued education, which they had sacrificed to fight in the war. These are all signs of a disconnected society, which wasn't unusual for a post-conflict community, because here trust was difficult to repair. There was a loss of fundamental human needs, particularly a sense of safety, understanding, and connection. Yet, despite this, the Nepalese people found unexpected solutions with workshops. To so many of us, this word connotes obligatory meetings, but to Nepal, it became a tool for peace. Local volunteers and NGOs created the space, which became a part of local government structures to address these community issues, rebuilding social relationships, and aim to restore human needs that had been lost during the war. These workshops helped people solve differences with a neutral third party who was trained. They aimed to aid the process for many of these ex-combatants to be reintegrated and welcomed back into society, overall helping to overcome many of the consequences that war left the people of Nepal with. I think this topic is really important to explore because it shows how meaningful solutions can emerge from everyday, ordinary spaces. People don't have to wait for a revolutionary policy or action from the government. They have the agency to act, and like I said before, I think the role of citizens can be overlooked. But these workshops achieved an extent of peace through simple acts. They brought people together who had lived through violence, displacement, and loss, and gave them a space to share these experiences and relearn cooperation and rebuild relationships. If anything, the recent revolution shows that the efforts of a community building were effective in Nepal. I really wanted to focus on the perspectives and the mundane solutions that you don't really hear about often in my article, and I learned so much researching this topic. I hope you did too. Thank you for listening to the podcast and reading my article.